Well, good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be, and welcome to another lockdown lecture. Our sponsors, our co-sponsors this evening are the Simon Wiesenthal Centre. For those who don't know Harif, we are the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. We aim to raise awareness of the history and culture of these Jews, and we've been Zooming ever since the beginning of the pandemic, and we don't intend to stop just yet. The session tonight is being live streamed to the Harif Facebook page, or will be shortly. Those who haven't yet subscribed to our mailing list, I do urge you to do so. You can do so at www.harif.org, and you'll get regular updates of our activities. Don't forget to check out our sister website, Point of No Return, which keeps you up to date with the news. You will be welcome to ask questions of our speaker tonight, but please do leave them to the end of his presentation, and do type them in the chat, which is the bottom at the icon at the bottom of your screen. So on to tonight's topic, which is the Nazis and the Middle East. In 1937, the pamphlet Islam and Judaism heralded the arrival in the Muslim world of a new form of Jew hatred, Islamic antisemitism, fusing scriptural anti-Judaism and modern European antisemitism. How did it penetrate the Arab and Muslim world? How did it pave the way for the Arabs' war against the Jews of mandatory Palestine? And what is its legacy today? Here to answer all these questions is Dr. Matthias Kuentzel, author of a new book in German, and he will present archive findings showing how the image of the Jews changed under the influence of Arabic language radio propaganda during World War II. Dr. Kuentzel is an author and political scientist who lives just north of Hamburg in Germany. He has written countless essays and articles and a number of books in German, but his award-winning Jihad and Jew Hatred, which I have here and highly recommend, was published in 2007 and translated into English. And he's also written a book called Germany and Iran, that was published in 2014, also in English. His research and writing has focused on anti-Semitism in current Islamic thinking, Islamism, Nazism, Iran, and European policies towards the Middle East and Iran. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kuentzel and thank him very much for joining us. And we look forward to your presentation. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Lynn, for the kind introduction and for inviting me. And thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. I look forward to our discussion after my presentation. I will talk today about Islamic anti-Semitism in the Middle East and the role Nazi Germany has played in spreading it. It summarizes, as you already told, some of the results of my latest book, which is this one about Nazis and the Nahe Osten, the book which I hope will be published in English later this year. Okay, now let me turn to my statement. And this is always a dangerous minute to get the parts of this presentation. The first, what does the term Islamic anti-Semitism mean? What makes it different from other forms of hatred of Jews? This is my first part. The second part is the main part today, a trip into history. How did Islamic anti-Semitism develop and what was the role of National Socialism in this regard? Third, the contemporary consequences of Islamic anti-Semitism, especially against the background of new developments in the Arab world, such as the Abraham Accords. So I start with, what does the term Islamic anti-Semitism mean? Usually Muslims and non-Muslims use the same tropes to express hostility towards Jews: Israel-related anti-Semitism, conspiracy myths, etc. Islamic anti-Semitism, however, exists only in Muslim communities. This term is neither a general attack on Islam nor a general accusation against Muslims. It refers to a religiously motivated form of modern anti-Semitism that is based on the fusion of two very different sources: the Islamic anti-Judaism of the 7th and 8th centuries and modern European anti-Semitism, which emerged in the 19th century. The phantasm of a Jewish world conspiracy, which is so central to European anti-Semitism, was not a feature of the original image of the Jews in Islam. Only in the Christian tradition do Jews appear as a dark and potent force capable of killing even God's only son. In Islamic teachings, it was not the Jews who allegedly murdered the prophet, but the prophet who murdered the Jews. Therefore, some typical features of European anti-Semitism did not appear in the Muslim world. To quote Bernard Lewis, quote, "There was no fears of Jewish conspiracy and domination, no charges of diabolic evil. Jews were not accused of poisoning wells or spreading the plague," end quote. Instead, Muslims treated the Jews with contempt and condescending toleration in order to keep them subservient as dhimmis. For Muslims, the Christian idea that the Jews represent a permanent threat to the world seemed absurd. However, with the rise of Islamic anti-Semitism, this significant difference was blurred. My first case in point is the Charter of Hamas, published in 1988. Article 7 of this charter cites a hadith according to which the Prophet Muhammad said, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews. When the Jew will hide behind stones and trees, the stones and trees will say, 'O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him.'" This image of the Jew, a cowering weakling, corresponds to the Islamic tradition. In contrast, in Article 22 of the same charter, we read the following about the Jews: "They were behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, and most of the revolutions we heard and hear about here and there. They were behind World War I, they were behind World War II. There is no war going on anywhere without having their finger in it." The Hamas Charter thus portrays the Jews on the one hand as degraded, fleeing and hiding, and on the other as the secret and true rulers of the world. These two pictures of the Jews are of course incompatible. It is a contradictory and therefore ridiculous construction. Through this mixture, however, both components become radicalized. European anti-Semitism is revitalized by the fanatical moment of radical Islam, while the old anti-Judaism of the Quran, now supplemented by the world conspiracy theory receives a new and deadly quality. One prominent feature of Islamic anti-Semitism is the conviction that Jews everywhere in league with Israel are behind a sinister plot to undermine and eradicate Islam. Let's take a look at Said Qutb's pamphlet, Our Struggle with the Jews, written in the early 1950s. Qutb was a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood and one of the most prominent Muslims of the 20th century. After the Arab defeat in 1967, the Saudis spread his anti-Jewish pamphlet en masse in the Islamic world. Our Struggle with the Jews links the 7th century with the 20th century as if nothing had happened in the interim. I quote, "The Jews plotted against the Muslim community from the first day it became a community. This bitter war which the Jews launched against Islam has not been extinguished even for one moment for close on 14 centuries until this moment. The Jews will be satisfied only with the destruction of this religion, Islam." Let me highlight two aspects of this quote. Qutb describes the evil of the Jews as immutable and permanent, transcending times and circumstances. His viewpoint thus merged with European racism. The conclusion is obvious. Since the Jews allegedly can't change their behavior, they must disappear from the world. Secondly, Qutb's revisionism. While the real Jews of Medina never had a chance against Mohammed, Qutb's tract revises this history. It presents the Muslims as the victims and the Jews as aggressors against Islam. This is a paranoid projection. We know this type of paranoid projection from the Nazi ideology. Those who want to kill the Jews justify their intention with a fantasy that the Jews have launched a deadly war against them. Qutb thus radicalized the hatred of Jews in Islamic terms and transferred the territorial dispute about Israel into a religious war, with the Muslims representing the party of God and the Jews representing the party of Satan. A variant of Qutb's paranoid delusion is the Al-Aqsa in Danger campaign, which is still virulent today, a topic I will come back to. Let me summarize my first part. Islamic anti-Semitism differs from European anti-Semitism insofar as it adopts the hate image of the overpowering Jew, but combines it with the concept of religious war with all its accompanying ingredients, such as a belief in paradise and the martyr ideology. Islamic anti-Semitism also differs from Islamic anti-Judaism insofar as it turns the demi-Jew into a cosmic danger that is supposed to even threaten the existence of Islam. This transformation of the Prophet's Jewish adversaries from a minor nuisance to the incarnation of evil took, of course, some time, which brings me to my second part. The pioneers who transferred European anti-Semitism in the Orient were, of course, Christian minorities in the Ottoman Empire, especially European priests and diplomats who dragged the blood libel into the Orient. The Dreyfus affair increased the spread of anti-Semitism in the French sphere of influence, especially the Maghreb. In 1918, the first edition of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion appeared in Palestine. However, all of these activities could only reach a tiny minority of Arab Muslims. This began to change only in the 1930s, and amazingly, it was Nazi Germany that initiated this change. In 1937, a decisive year, the Peel Commission's first partition plan for Palestine suggested the creation of a small Jewish sub-state in Palestine. This alerted Nazi Germany, which only now started to incite Arab anti-Semitism in a systematic and massive way. However, and this is of importance, Berlin discovered that its concept of racial anti-Semitism did not find fertile ground in Muslim communities. The level of education of the broad masses is not advanced enough for the understanding of the race theory, wrote a leading Nazi in Egypt. We have to lay all the emphasis on the religious motive in our propaganda in the Islamic world. This is the only way to win over the Orientals, urged a member of the German embassy in Tehran. Therefore, to win over the Arabs, the Nazis of all people began to dress up as Muslims. This cartoon was published in the journal Great Britain and the East. You see Mr. Goebbels on the left and Mr. Goering on the right. Both tried to make Hitler look like a Muslim. It's a great cartoon. You see the curved dagger in Hitler's belt and the prayer chain slips out of the sleeve. Religion is probably not meant that seriously after all. But that is what happened. The Nazis disguised themselves as Muslims and used and misused Islamic scripture so as to lend credibility to their murderous hate of Jews. From now on, German propaganda combined Islam with anti-Jewish agitation to an extent that had not hitherto been known in the modern Muslim world, wrote David Motterdell in his study, Islam and Nazi Germany's War. Sacred texts such as the Quran were politicized to incite religious violence. I would like to give you two examples of the Nazis' action in this regard. The first deals with the brochure Islam and Jewry, or Islam und Judentum, which you see here. The other with Nazis' Arabic radio propaganda. Islam and Jewry is, as far as I know, the very first document that systematically combined religious tropes of the 7th century with elements of Europe's conspiracy theory. It is thus the first written evidence of Islamic anti-Semitism and the forerunner of Said Qutb's Our Struggle with the Jews. This pamphlet concludes with the following words. The verses from the Quran and Hadith prove to you that the Jews have been the bitterest enemies of Islam and continue to try to destroy it. Do not believe them. They only know hypocrisy and cunning. Hold together, fight for the Islamic thought, fight for your religion and your existence. Do not rest until your land is free of the Jews. Judenfrei, a typical Nazi expression which we do not find in early Islamic writing. The first Arabic version of Islam.
Sorry, Matthias, can we try screen sharing again just to see if it works?
It doesn't work now?
No, it's not working at all.
Oh, I didn't know that. It's perfect for me here. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, that's terrible. How terrible.
Great.
Okay, well, that bit worked before. Brilliant.
That's it. We can see the PowerPoint.
I want you to see the whole screen. From the very beginning.
No, that's design layout you're in.
Can you see it now?
Yes, it works
yes.
perfectly. Perfectly.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry. It's fine.
It worked for me, but not for you. It didn't know that.
Don't worry. So
I will go very fast.
Very fast. Yeah.
This was a Hamas charter. This was Said Qutb with a very important quote, Our Struggle with the Jews. Then we saw the quotes of Nazis saying, well, we can't deal with the Muslims in our racist way of thinking. And then this is a cartoon which I described a bit with Goebbels on the left and Göring on the right, putting on this Muslim wardrobe, this mantle for Hitler. And I quoted David Mottadel, and then I started to deal with both the brochure Islam and Jewry and the Nazi radio broadcast in Arabic language. So this is where we stopped. Islam and Jewry, this brochure, the first document of Islamic anti-Semitism, was discovered only recently by Dr. Eddie Cohn, a colleague and friend of mine in Tel Aviv. This 30 pages brochure was published in August 1937 in Cairo by Mohammed Ali Al-Taher, the director of the Palestinian Arab Bureau of Information in Egypt, who is said to have had many contacts with Nazi agents in Egypt. 1 month later, already in September 1937, this Arabic version was distributed to the 400 participants of the first Pan-Arab Congress in Bludan, a location in Syria. This Congress was organized by Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, in order to fight the two-state solution according to the Peel Plan. In 1938, the German version of Islam and Jewry was published in Berlin under the title Islam, Judaism, Call of the Grand Mufti to the Islamic World in 1937. This was the very first time that an author of this text, Haj Amin al-Husseini, was mentioned. And then finally, but most importantly, during the Second World War, the Arab version of this brochure was printed and distributed in large numbers by German forces and translated into several languages. There is no doubt that the Nazis used this pamphlet for their propaganda purposes. To what extent they were also involved in its creation is, however, still unknown. You see here the title sheet of the Arabic version, and you see here the German version, Islam, Judentum, Aufruf des Großmufti an die islamische Welt. And in 1937 and 1937. And this timing, 1937, is also very important because the so-called Nakba and Israeli rule over Gaza and the West Bank were still in a distant future. This timing, this timing contradicts the widespread assumption that Islamic anti-Semitism developed as a response to alleged Israeli misdeeds. It was not the behavior of the Zionists that prompted the publication of this hostile text, but rather the very first attempt to agree on a two-state plan, the Peel Plan of 1937. Islamic anti-Semitism was thus invented to destroy the first relevant attempt at a compromise which had initially at least been met with a degree of approval from some moderate Arabs. So far to the brochure Islam and Judentum. Now we start with Radio Season. My second example concerns the Nazis' most important instrument for the propagation of anti-Semitism, including Islamic anti-Semitism, broadcasts in Arabic language. They were broadcast from this shortwave transmitter from Season, a small town south of Berlin, every night for 6 years, from April 1939 until April 1945. That station spread hatred of Jews in Arabic across the Arab world. Back then, listening to the radio was not a private, but a public affair. The men listened to the radio at the bazaar, at marketplaces, and in coffee houses. The content of the programs became the dominant topic of conversation which multiplied their impact. The subline of this photo says, "This is what radio reception looks like in Beirut, zealous Arab Germany listeners at a break time in Syria." American historian Jeffrey Harif discovered the transcribed manuscripts of these broadcasts and made them known in his brilliant study, Nazi Propaganda for the Arab World, a must-read. Harif highlights the centrality of Quranic teaching in Germany's Arabic language propaganda. Radio Season addressed the audience indeed as Muslims, not as Arabs. These broadcasts combined the recitation of Quranic verses with a crude, popular anti-Semitism. This is what the British Secret Service reported on the effect of this propaganda. In general, it may be said that the middle, and lower classes listen to the Arabic broadcasts from Berlin with a good deal of enjoyment. They like the racy, juicy stuff which is put over. What the average Palestinian Arab does imbibe, however, is the anti-Jew material. This he wants to hear and to believe, and he does both. To that extent, German propaganda is definitely effective. And Berlin's broadcasts in Arabic were well done indeed. There were excellent speakers, such like Younes Bakhri, carefully selected Arabic music, and a very good sound quality. At times, the BBC people and others were downright desperate, as this cartoon shows. You see on the one hand, Nazi propaganda, juicy Hamburg steaks, and on the other hand, the British restaurant, the German broadcast agitating, mocking, and inciting, the BBC on the other hand, dull, unbiased, objective. There are reports which show that the anti-Semitic message of Radio Season was popular also among Arabs who otherwise disliked or even hated Nazi Germany. That's not particularly surprising because when it came to hating Jews, the Nazis could build on the patterns of early Islamic anti-Judaism, and they could instrumentalize the local conflict with the Zionists. I would like to add another aspect which I think is important. The Allies took, of course, various precautions to minimize the effect of Radio Season. However, they were speechless when it came to the subject of anti-Semitism. They did not want to get a reputation for defending Jews, and thus at least partially confirming Nazi propaganda. In this area, the field was completely left to Goebbels and the like. In retrospect, those 6 years of permanent radio propaganda turned out to be a turning point that divided Middle Eastern history into a before and an after. These years changed the image of the Jews in the Arab world. They fostered an exclusively anti-Jewish reading of the Quran. They popularized the European world conspiracy myth, and they shaped a genocidal rhetoric towards Zionism in Israel. Gradually, the Arabs adopted the guidelines of Islamic anti-Semitism and the idea that the Jews wanted to destroy Muslims and extinguish Islam, as Radio Season kept saying. This Nazi propaganda postcard in Arabic language, subtitled Roosevelt, Churchill, and Weizmann distribute the Arab lands to the Jews, was supposed to stir up that very fear. This hatred and these paranoid fantasies survived the war and also influenced the leaders of the Arab world in the post-war years. This is one of the reasons why they reacted so horrified to the United Nations partition plan of November 1947. In my book, currently available only in German, I show the extent to which the aftermath of Nazi propaganda contributed to the Arab decision to attack the just founded Israel in May 1948. It was also the opinion of Ali Mahir, the former prime minister of Egypt, that Arab opposition to Zionism was at least partly produced or strengthened by the Nazi propaganda in the Arab East. Let me summarize the second part. The history of Islamic anti-Semitism reveals the ordered city with which German Nazis used Islam for the fulfillment of their political interests. They streamlined the Quran's contradictory statements about Jews for anti-Semitic purposes. Yet this brief encounter between Nazi ideology and the Arab world had consequences that continue to reverberate in the Middle East. Until this day, the anti-Jewish passages from the early writings of Islam are repeated incessantly. To this day, world affairs are explained by using the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Until this day, leading representatives of the Palestinian Authority regard any attempt to normalize relations with Israel as high treason. Let me come back now to the present and to the question of today's significance of Islamic anti-Semitism in the Arab world. Today's Islamic anti-Semitism take many forms. One example is the Al-Aqsa in Danger campaign. Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, started it almost 100 years ago with a claim that the Jews were eager to destroy or to devour the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, the third most important sanctuary of Islam. Recent mass mobilizations based on this lie took place as recently as July 2017, when Israel tried to upgrade the safety equipment at the Temple Mount. And again, at the end of 2017, when the United States moved their embassy to Jerusalem, the Palestinian Authority condemned Trump's decision in religious terms as, quote, aggression against Islam, aggression against the Quran, aggression against the Muslims, aggression against the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and aggression against humanity. My second example relates to Islamic anti-Semitism as a means to distort history. The Al-Aqsa in Danger lie is indeed supplemented by a second big lie, the laughable assertion that there is no connection at all between the Jews and Jerusalem. Take the example of Professor Mohammed Wahib al-Husseini, an archaeologist from Jordan. The Israelites are unable to convince anyone anywhere in the world that they have a historic right to this blessed land. They did not have any existence in history in Palestine, and especially not in Jerusalem. No scholar supports them in this, end quote. And there are hundreds of quotes like this. You may well laugh at such nonsense, but unfortunately, those who say these things mean business. A new front of religious war is being opened here, and Islamic anti-Semitism is being fed. Like the denial of the Holocaust, this temple denial campaign also insinuates the presence of a large-scale Jewish conspiracy in which the Jews, through their power in politics and media, are able to suppress the so-called real truth about Jerusalem. Finally, and most importantly, there is an ongoing anti-normalization campaign. We are currently witnessing, as you all know, the possible development of a new Arab world that is no longer united against Israel. Here you see Bibi, next to him, the foreign minister of the Emirates, and the Bahrain's foreign minister on the right. The remark by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that the Israelis, quote, have the right to live peacefully in their state was also important. Both developments indicate that it is not the Quran as such that hinders the normalization of relations between Arabs and Israel, but its anti-Semitic interpretation. This period of thaw also triggers new debates about anti-Semitism and Islam. For decades, the Quran has been used to justify hatred of Jews and of Israel. Today, however, many articles and sermons originating from the Gulf countries say the opposite. Supporters of the peace agreement refer to Quranic verses that seem to show Islam's alleged preference for peace. They cite, for example, Surah 8, verse 61, if they are inclined to peace, make peace with them. The highest cleric from the Emirates announced that the peace agreement with Israel was to be welcomed also for religious reasons, as it would help achieve fundamental Sharia goals. The largest non-governmental organization of imams in the world, the Global Imams Council, even adopted the working definition of anti-Semitism as agreed by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Quote, we understand the importance of clerical presence in these peace developments, explains the head of this organization, Council President Imam al-Budia. This is an amazing development. It goes without saying that we have to remain skeptical and wait and see whether these are just fine words or whether the school curricula or the reporting on Israel will change on the ground, and whether the Arab advocates of peace with Israel will be able to move freely and safely in their respective countries. Crucial, however, is the fact that three powerful centers of resistance to normalization are currently trying to do everything possible to torpedo this hopeful development. The Sunni Islamists, still led by Erdogan, the Shiite Islamists led by Khamenei, and the leadership of the Palestinians led by Mahmoud Abbas. Just as Islamic anti-Semitism was used in 1937 to prevent compromises, Islamic anti-Semitism is also today their major tool to intimidate the Arab leaderships and populations and to quickly destroy the growing hopes for peace. To quote Ayatollah Khamenei, those who normalize relations with Israel break with the Quran and the Islamic faith. To quote Hamas, the Emirates are, quote, committing high treason against Allah, the Prophet Muhammad, and the Muslims. Normalization with Israel goes against what Allah revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. The Palestinian Authority instructed the Palestinian imams to use anti-Jewish verses of the Quran for their sermons, such as Surah 2, verse 120, quote, and never will the Jews or the Christians approve of you until you follow their religion, end quote. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and Palestine even issued a fatwa which indicates that residents of the Emirates are forbidden to visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Palestinians should boycott and shun them. This list could easily be extended. Thus, we have to conclude. This religion is once again being deliberately placed in the service of anti-Semitism. Once promoted by Nazi Germany, Islamic anti-Semitism continues to affect perception and policy of the Muslim world today. Nobody knows how the fight between the protagonists of a Jewish-friendly interpretation of the Quran and those of an anti-Jewish interpretation will end. We know, however, that the outcome of this dispute can make the difference between peace or war. Islamic anti-Semitism is a relatively recent invention that gives at least some hope that it can be overcome in the inner Islamic discourse over the next few decades. So thank you for your attention. And I'm very, very sorry that you missed the first 1,000.
Well, I think it was fine in the end. Thank you very much. We got to see the whole PowerPoint. While people are perhaps writing their questions in the chat, I wanted to start off with a question for you, Matthias, and that is, can you explain the link between Islamic anti-Semitism and Iran, the Iranian Ayatollahs? Because I know you mention in your book, Jihad and Jew Hatred, that Ayatollah Khomeini was influenced by Nazi broadcasts. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. It's very interesting to know that Khomeini, when he was 38 years old, bought a radio. He was in Iraq at the time. And every evening he listened to Radio Berlin or Radio Season and also to BBC. And he collected a group of Muslims around him, sitting every evening and listening to both radio stations. So Khomeini was never sympathetic to Nazi Germany. He was against Nazi Germany. But I'm sure that this kind of anti-Semitic thinking, that the Jews want to rule the world, for example, which is not part of the Islamic teaching from older times, that this influenced him a lot. And then when he started his campaigns against the Jews in the middle of the 60s, even calling the Shah of Persia a Jew, he again used the language of European anti-Semitism. There are other influences, of course, as well. For example, his connections to people sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt during the 40s. So it's not the only source, the German radio transmitter, but it may have influenced Khomeini a lot. And he was a person since 1979, you know, there was no Hamas charter before that date. The whole Middle East conflict was put by Khomeini in this religious frame. You know, the evil against the good, and only one side can survive. And so he was really the heir of Said Qutb, who said the same before.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain the impact on the Jews in the Arab world in terms of Islamic anti-Semitism, or did they suffer from a more nationalist kind of anti-Semitism, if you like?
Oh, well,
an anti-colonial anti-Semitism. I mean, what actually was the driving force behind what the Jews suffered in the 1940s, for instance?
Well, I wrote a lot about the Farhud in Iraq, and there we have a lot of proof that the radio from Berlin played a big role, and Bahri also played a big role, and the Mufti with their religious points. It's difficult, you know, the Arab world is a big world, and you have to make a differentiation between different countries. What I think is, you know, I spoke about the big divide, the time before 1939 and the time afterwards. So I say there was a big split in the Arab world. And one result of the split was the Vertreibung, was hunting away the Jews in the Arab countries. And this was, of course, a very big change of the whole Arab world. I would say that the whole misery of the Arab world is partly caused by this hunting away from Jews from those countries. So the whole scene changed after this experience between 1939 and 1945 and the war against the new founded Israel in 1948. The whole Arab world changed at that time, and I think it's partly as at least due to the Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda from Germany.
And Richard Galber asks the question, has there been much of a fusion between Nazi anti-Semitism and the Soviet anti-Semitism that seems to permeate academia and the progressive anti-Semitism of today?
Well, the Soviet anti-Semitism, which, you know, during the first years, it's very interesting, and Jeffrey Harif is just producing a new book about that. The Soviets helped at the beginning Israel a lot. Without the Soviet Union, maybe Israel wouldn't come into existence in the year 1947, 1948. But then afterwards, Stalin really changed his mood, and this was, you know, with the doctors in Moscow and the whole affairs against Jews. This was very much European anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories. So this was a part of the Soviet Union to spread this kind of conspiracy motivated anti-Semitism, of course, not Islamic anti-Semitism.
Right. And Jonathan Maimon wants to know, can you talk a little more about how modern Arab leaders use language in the Quran to justify their warmer relationship with Israel? He says this is interesting and he hadn't heard this before.
Again, please.
So he wants, I think, a few more examples of how modern Arab leaders, I think he means that the ones who signed the Abraham Accords, how they use the positive versions, the positive verses in the Quran.
Yes. Of course. I was amazed as well. And it's of course not true. You don't have a Quran which is pro-Jewish. You don't have a Quran which is only anti-Jewish. In both cases, it's political propaganda, political misuse of the Holy Script. You have to be honest, and you have to say that it's contradictory passages within the Quran, and it's a question of interpretation, which part you want to emphasize and which part you don't want to emphasize. So this is all political propaganda. But I'm sorry, I got my quote, which I read to you from memory, and memory is a very good source for this whole development. But I haven't got other quotes of Quran verses in favor of Israel. But of course, there are some verses. I recall some verses to confirm the position that there is a special part of the Arab lands for the Jews. There are some verses in the Quran.
And certainly the earlier verses do confirm, are sort of positive verses, aren't they? And they talk of the children of Israel rather than the Jews. Right. Yeah. Anne and Michael Crook found your talk absolutely fascinating, as we did. Also, why do you think that the connection between the Nazis and Islamic anti-Semitism doesn't seem to be widely known? Is it because of any attempt to make it more, is it because any attempt to make it more widely known is greeted with accusations that it is an anti-Muslim prejudice or Islamophobia, I think?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
You want to continue or?
No, I finished, yes.
Okay, well, I think the main reason is people want to blame Israel for anti-Semitism in the Middle East. And my research shows that this is not the whole, the whole story. It's very fascinating to see that people also in Germany, especially from the political left, always want to blame Israel for everything which is bad in the world. And if there is anti-Semitism, it must be just a reaction, a just reaction partly to Israel's misdeeds. And if you kill this argument, at least partly, they get very aggressive and don't want to believe in new facts. So this is, in my opinion, one of the main important debates we have to continue. And the other thing is, of course, if you say something negative about Muslims, you are, of course, a racist, an anti-Muslim racist. You are accused of being, Islamophobe and so on and so forth. This is also a very difficult issue. And people like me who deal with this issue, of course, are blamed quite often by left-wing people as being a racist. They didn't read any word of my text, but it's just a personal attack. It's an attack against the person who deals with the topic in an objective way. So this is the second reason why you don't hear about this a lot. And it's also, since 9/11, there is a new debate about the origins of anti-Semitism in the Middle East. You had some new books, for example, by Jeffrey Herf and others, David Mortadell and others, which weren't there before 9/11. So the whole issue got a new impact after 9/11. And so this is also a reason why we only now start to research this whole aspect of history.
Actually, a clarification from Samish. He says most of the pro-Judaism quotes in the Quran refer to the Geulah, that the Jews will return to their land as prophesied in the Tanakh. Thank you for that. Another question from Alan. Did any of the Arab propagandists transmitting from Radio Season converse with any of the other propagandists, such as William Joyce, Lord Haw-Haw? He was obviously broadcasting in English.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Yunus Bakhri, who was the main speaker in Radio Season, he was like Lord Haha. He was very prominent. Everyone in the Middle East knew his voice. He tried to copy Hitler in the kind of speaking. And so we have very interesting proof for his ability to use his voice in a very exaggerated way. And this is something similar with Lord Haha. But these people wanted to address the Arab audience. So they wouldn't use Lord Haha as an example or something like that. It was a very special kind of agitation.
Right.
And every broadcast from Season started with Quran verses, for example. And so the secular British anti-Semitism, was no topic within those broadcasts.
Right. And Janet raises the question of Yad Vashem. I'm sure you're currently aware of the controversy. At Yad Vashem, there used to be a floor-to-ceiling photo of the famous meeting of the Mufti meeting Hitler in November 1941. And that photo was removed when Yad Vashem was redesigned in the 1990s. And the current chairman of Yad Vashem, well, first of all, denied that the photo was ever there, and now refuses to reinstate that photo. Do you think he's right? What is your view? Matthias, can you hear me? Help. Have we lost him?
We have lost Matthias.
That's a shame. Hopefully he will try and come in again. So
that's not Matthias. Still have to wait for him.
yeah.
Go to try
Sorry.
calling him, darling.
I have to find his number. Yeah, I'm sure he'll realize that he's lost his signal or whatever. Yeah, so I don't know what you feel about this, Janet. Presumably you are in favor of reinstating that photo. A lot of people are. There's quite a controversy going on at the moment. People say, well, the Mufti's role was not so important in in this whole business. He certainly didn't have such an effect on the final solution, and we know that is true. But he certainly had an influence on the Farhud, as we know, and he set up SS divisions in Yugoslavia, etc. So, and of course, his influence on Islamic anti-Semitism is not to be sneezed at. Don't know if we have.
No, Matthias is not back yet.
No, he's not back. Oh, that's a great shame. I think we may have to finish on that note.
Should we wait another 2 minutes? Wait 2 more minutes.
Yeah, maybe. Batio, would you like to say something? Would you like to comment?
Want me to unmute Batio?
Yes. Can you say, we can't hear you yet?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
now we can. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Well, I found Matthias' lecture absolutely fascinating. And it is not a very easy research to do, especially when you live in Germany. I admire greatly his courage and his moral force to examine this terrible problem, the genocide of the Jewish people, the hatred against Jews. I must say that I wouldn't be able to do it. It required from a researcher a tremendous moral force. And I want to thank him for let us sharing his views and the result of his life work. And of course, I agree with everything he has said. I think that there is an idea of the Jewish being a plotter. I don't know if you say plotter, making plot in the Quran. Yes, because it is said that the Jews plotted against the prophet. So it was easy for the German in their propaganda to develop this theme in Islam. In the Islamic and Arab propaganda. But I don't want to add, because whatever you have said, and especially Matthias, is so important that I don't want to keep you listening to me. I was extremely interested, and I thank you, Lynn, for having organized so wonderful and instructive meetings about the history of the Jews of Arab countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, Batio, but yeah, I mean, coming from you, it is a compliment indeed. Thank you. I think it remains for me to thank Matthias in absentia. Unfortunately, he hasn't come back to us, and to thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm sorry about the technical problems, but I think we all benefited a great deal from Matthias and his fantastic insights into Islamic anti-Semitism. So thank you very much indeed. And I wish you Moadim Lesimcha, Chag Purim Sameach for tomorrow. Please do join us in 2 weeks' time when we will be having a conversation between grandparents and grandchildren about the grandparents' lives in Arab countries and their uprooting from them. And so lovely to see you all.